from Chicago. My father was a priest, 50 plus years at the same parish. I went to Holy Cross Seminary. I then went for my PhD in theology, and then I just took the sort of professor route. I've been at Fordham for actually going to my 17th year at Fordham. Since I started there in 2000, we started a Orthodox Christian Studies Center. I invite you to go visit that. It's pretty easy to find, fordham.edu/orthodoxy. And one of the things related to the Orthodoxy Center is, in addition to programming and some other things, we started a blog called publicorthodoxy.org. I'm going to talk to you about, I'm spiritual but not religious, but I'm going to talk to you about what's called the nuns. So the N-O-N-E-S, not the N-U-N-S. So the N-O-N-E-S. If you really want to follow this, there's two sources now that are really keeping track of this phenomenon. There is the Pew Research Center. And so you can just Google Pew Research Center, and it has a project on public religion or religion in public life. And they're starting to include the Orthodox now. When they used to do religion in America, sort of statistics and things like that, they weren't really including the Orthodox. For the last 5 to 7 years now, in statistics, they've been including Orthodox churches. Now, one of the frightening statistics is that 50% of young people who grow up in the Orthodox Church leave. The other place that you could go to is something called PRRI. It's Public Religion Research Institute. I'm going to pass this around a little bit, but I want to start with this because this just came out. This report just came out. So some quick statistics. One is that the percentage of Americans now who are declaring nuns, N-O-N-E, which is non-affiliation, is about 25%. Now, in 2012, it was about 16%. Over the years has been really dramatic statistically. And it's really kind of increasing. It's, whether it'll peak or not, I don't know. I'm not a statistician. But what's even a little bit more troubling is that in the millennial age group, which is about 18 to 30, it's hovering around 40%. In places like UK and some other parts of Western Europe, it's even, all these numbers are even higher and higher. So the general statistics is that the older cohort is more likely to affiliate, and the younger cohort is much more likely to disaffiliate. That means as the younger cohort goes older, we can't expect that general trend necessarily that they're going to come back to the church when they're, getting married and having kids. There's a couple ways we could react to this. One way we could react to this is by just simply condemning them. I don't think that's the best route. I think that we really have to listen to what they're saying. We have to sort of listen and find out why it is that they're choosing to disaffiliate. And I think even as part of Christian life, it's really a struggle to live up to the commandments to love God and neighbor with all ourselves. It's hard to figure out the kinds of things that we need to do in order to make that happen at a deeper level. One of the things that enables that kind of love, both of God and of neighbor, is listening. Listening doesn't necessarily mean you have to agree. Listening doesn't mean you're enabling. Listening doesn't mean that you're just kind of saying whatever. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're approving. It just means you're listening, and they also feel heard. I think we have to listen and not be defensive about it, because I think the natural reaction is to be defensive, maybe throw it on them. They're a selfish generation. They're self-absorbed, they're into their phones and things like that, and maybe all that's true, I don't know, but I don't think that that's the best tactic. Right? It's not necessarily the best tactic for people who are leaving the church, just to basically approach the situation in a way that we're just simply condemning them. I'm pretty sure that's not going to bring them back. And that probably wasn't St. Paul's best method either, if we really read St. Paul's epistles. If we were to listen, what would we hear them say? The PRI is probably the one study where we're probably getting closer to the answer. So when people were asked, why are you stopped coming? Why are you disaffiliating? Well, the one that got the highest percentage is stop believing in the religion's teachings. That's number one. That got 60% as yes, important. Second, 32%, your family was never that religious growing up. So if we put those two things together a little bit, one of the things that we have to realize is that how we talk about our faith is important. If it's not being talked about because more and more families are not very religious, put that together with Perhaps it's being talked about in a way, even for people who maybe grew up, and in a way that's not very convincing, seems very odd, then perhaps that's something we need to consider and talk about. Personally, I've always thought that that's something we needed to address. I've always thought, only because of my own personal experiences. I grew up in the church, and I started reading theology, and I started doing this when I was 15, reading Kallistos Ware's Orthodox Church, and then kind of moving on from there. You have questions. I mean, things don't really make sense. And that's okay. I mean, I think it's okay to allow people to have those kinds of questions. I don't think the just believe and shut up thing works anymore. It might have worked, in my grandmother's village in Greece in 1920, but it doesn't work now. It's a different time. And so those questions are good. I think we have to encourage questions, we have to encourage listening, and I think we have to encourage respectful disagreement. If some of our young people, and this is going to get to the third reason now, but if some of our young people have a really hard time with the certain things that the church is saying about certain issues, I think that we need to allow them to speak and to say so. I think that how we talk about our faith and allowing people to really maybe express differences and disagreements, I think is a kind of an important feature here. At least that's what I'm hearing from at least this particular poll. But I do believe that if we can somehow talk about our faith in a way that we're not simply explaining what it is, but why it makes sense, which is hard. At least we're making an attempt to address one of the reasons why they seem to be leaving. I'll just share with you a story. There was a situation in a Sunday school where middle schoolers were a very well-intentioned Sunday school teacher who was really afraid that these students were going to go into schools and high schools and have a kind of anti-religion scientist, and that does happen. I've experienced it myself. I recognize it. Scientists in public schools, they have an axe to grind, and so they sort of teach their science in a way, and they sort of add, and look, there's no God, right? So it's very interesting how you can teach religion in public schools, but you can have scientists basically come to atheist conclusions because of what their science is. So that's a complete and utter contradiction, but anyway, it's one we have to deal with. But the well-intentioned Sunday school teacher really felt that it was necessary, in order to protect the students, to teach them that our church rejects evolution. Most of those students in that class had a crisis because of that. And that well-intentioned teacher was absolutely 100% wrong. There are certain evangelical Christians who think that, but not the Orthodox Church. And I've said this before publicly. I said, if we make evolution one of our battle cries, we are going to lose that battle. Now, these are very difficult questions and things like that, but I mean, these are the kinds of things we have to be aware of and be careful about. These are the kinds of questions our students have, our kids have, and they're asking hard questions and good questions, but I always think that questions is not a problem. God is the one that makes questioning possible so that we can find our way to go. So the third reason that they give, 29%, is negative religious teachings about or treatment of gay and lesbian people. And amongst the millennials, it's higher. It's close to 40%. So again, I think we need to listen. Now, in saying what I'm saying, I don't want to make this an issue about what the church teaches about homosexuality. If you want me to come back and talk about that, I'm willing to do that, but I don't want to do that now. But one thing I will tell you is that we have Christians in the world now, including Orthodox, that think that somehow they need to draw this red line in the sand and make this the battle cry. And as a result, all they're doing is presenting Christianity as this anti-religion, not this for religion. Whatever the teaching is and so on and so forth, all young people are hearing is this. They're hearing the anti-message. So in my opinion, we kind of need to follow the lead of Pope Francis and just simply kind of say, stop obsessing over this. There are other things that we need to teach and talk about. There are other things about Christianity. And most importantly, what Christianity is about is our relationship with God. And for Orthodox, we describe that as a relationship of what we call theosis, or deification. I'll get to that in a minute. These are the top three here. I'm going to kind of focus on 1 and 2. As regards the third, My own advice would be that we need to encourage a space, and we're not willing to do that. We need to encourage a space where our young people are voicing their concern, or voicing what they feel is, without getting defensive. We need to sort of listen to what they're saying about the friends that they encounter, the family members that they're with, again, without getting defensive. I think even providing a space for them to be heard would go a very, very long way with them. I also think we need to stop making this a culture war issue. This is about human beings, and it's not meant to be an abstract culture war issue. We're talking about why people are leaving. And I think that we need to listen to what people are saying. And I think on this third issue, I think we need to have a different kind of approach. Just in terms of how people are, some Christians are deciding to make this a red line cultural war issue, and I just don't think that's very helpful. Now I want to speak on 1 and 2 in terms of stop believing in religion's teachings, and related to that, family was never religious because they're kind of related, but number 1 really in the sense of stop believing in the religious teachings, because actually I think young people really think just religion in general is like this. But especially Christianity, that this is what Christianity is. This is really in their mind what Christianity is about. You follow the rules so you can get to heaven and avoid hell. And if you break the rules, you're going to go to hell. And that's a problem. Because this might come as a big shock to you, but that's not really what Christianity is about. And I think that we really need to sort of de-emphasize a kind of rule-based understanding of what Christianity is about. I call it a legalistic understanding, this contractual understanding. This understanding that somehow, we have this contract with God that if somehow we have a checklist of things and we check things off, when we get up to the gates of heaven, we say, look, I've checked everything off, you've got nothing on me. And that's not why God created us. God did not create us to check things off. God created us to be in loving relationship with God. And God didn't need to do that. And when you're in a loving relationship, any relationship, friendship, marriage, you don't treat the other like a checklist. And though we can't treat God like a checklist. That's not how God wants to be treated. I want you to remember, I really, really all want you to remember the 4 Gospels before Lent. And Lent is one of the only times in which the church has sort of a preparation period in the sense of like, hey, get ready, Lent's coming. Do you realize that Christmas fast doesn't have that? The Christmas fast just hit you on the 15th, like, wait, where did that come from? And even if you pay attention to the liturgical hymns, there's nothing, absolutely nothing in the liturgical hymns that signals like, hey, the Christmas fast is coming. Get ready. There's nothing. In fact, the first time we actually start singing Christmas hymns is on November 21st. And that's because, I can tell you historically, because that's because the Christmas fast developed much later. But the Lenten fast, 4 Sundays ahead, there's a book that comes out that's devoted to Lent. But the gospel passages are key because the first gospel, or the first Sunday, and the first gospel, the theme of Sunday is, of course, the gospel theme. The publican and the Pharisee says, oh God, I'm praying here, and thank God I'm not like that guy. Because I do everything, and I do this, and I do that, and thank you, God, I'm not like that guy. And, the publican is like, yeah, I'm that guy. I'm sorry. The Pharisee probably followed all the rules. He was pretty good at it, and led him to be self-righteous, and superior, and all that. The next Sunday is the one of the prodigal son. And we all talk about the loving embrace and forgiveness, but I like to focus on the brother. Because the brother was right. The brother said, what are you doing? I did everything you told me to do. And yet you're having a feast for him. And the brother's right. I remember my wife saying once when she heard me speak about this, she said, it always bothered me when I was little about the brother. That's important to listen to, really. The perspective of a young child, feeling sorry for the brother. But here's the thing. You can do everything right. You can have your checklist. And if it means somehow you're feeling resentment and envy in your heart, when someone who didn't follow the checklist but repented at the last minute, you don't feel joy in your heart at that transformation, then your checklist is for naught, because God is not a contract. And so the third one, it's on the Last Judgment. We all focus again, I mean, if there's any gospel that makes us really think it's all about rules, it's that one, right? Because, Jesus basically says, did you do this, did you do that? You didn't do this. You didn't really do it to me, so go over here. He looks over one crucial part of that. He says, did you visit me in prison? And so the people by whom we are judged are the people who actually break the rules. It's hard, prison ministry. I was just speaking to these two young, wonderful people. I'm proud to say they're actually graduated from Fordham Orthodox. And they're kind of in charge, together with some others, of really trying to nationalize something called the Orthodox Prison Ministry. And they're really trying to make it like some really successful programs like International Orthodox Christian Charities and the Mission Center and some other things. It's uphill. But they were telling me some stories about how when they reach out to certain people, some Orthodox, it doesn't really register, And there's things like, there's sort of attitudes about the prisoners and they deserve it and all kinds of other things, and there's just not really you know what I'm saying? I mean, that piece of Matthew 25, did you visit me in prison? And look, I'm not trying to condemn people. It is a struggle to get to that point. There's a lot of fear involved, and it's understandable. There's also a lot of fear of failure, which is also understandable, because it's a very difficult ministry. But it is the one way we're going to be judged. And really, what Christ means that by being judged, I mean, it's not really like, oh, you might go to hell. It's just a sense of it's the one way by which we can really measure our own relationship with Christ. It's the one way we can really measure how deep am I in this. And it's okay to, in fact, that's what Christ wants, to just admit that I'm not deep in it. To be challenged by it, to work for it, to struggle with it. But it is one way in which we measure that depth. And then finally, the last Sunday, right before Lent, right before Clean Monday, Catarada de Fera, is a passage, it's called the Sunday of Forgiveness. And the gospel passage is about forgiveness. It's almost like this. It's not really saying like, make sure you follow all the rules or else. It's really saying, you're definitely going to break the rules. So just work on forgiveness. And let the fasting period and the Lenten period be a time to work towards being more forgiving people. Of course you're going to break the rules. Stop thinking you're not going to. But that's the great grace of God. Not the contract that God gives us, but the forgiveness that God gives us, no matter what we do. So I think all this to kind of say that if our perception of Christianity, if what we're teaching about Christianity, has something to do with a very strict, almost obsessive-like attitude toward rules, and a kind of false, imaginary perfection of following all the rules, then that's, I think, false. Don't get me wrong, we need rules, obviously. We need structure. We need ways of guiding our spiritual life. There's no question about that. But if it's all about the rules, it's not simply that we're getting, I think, Christianity wrong. I also think that our young people are just not finding that equation convincing anymore. And one of the reasons why it's not convincing is because it's based on fear. And God really wants us not to have a relationship of fear, but of love. Now, fear may work in the beginning, and fear does work sometimes with children. It does work in terms of getting them to follow certain rules, getting them to have proper manners, to be respectful of others. But St. Maximus the Confessor has a wonderful, wonderful line. He's a 7th century saint, great theologian. And he says, fear is like where you might begin, but then ultimately, fear is replaced by love. Fear goes away and is replaced by love. Fear and love cannot coexist. And God wants us to love God. I mean, that's really the challenge. That's really the struggle, and it's really the challenge. So when people are disaffiliating, when they're saying, I don't no longer be religious, when they're saying I'm spiritual but not religious, perhaps they're doing that because they just don't know that there are other ways to think about Christian faith and Christianity. Maybe they're doing that because they think the only way to think about it is this contractual, legalistic, follow the rules to get to heaven kind of way. Maybe if they knew that it was really about what the Orthodox call deification or theosis, which really means learning how to love, because God is love. Theosis means to become godlike. It means to unite ourselves with God. It means to have contact with God. I like to say Orthodox Christianity is a contact sport, because it's really about contact with God and struggling to have more and more contact with God. It's hard. The most that we can do is just really admit that we don't love God as much as we want to. And it's okay to admit that, because that's the beginning of the spiritual life. I know, maybe I'm a little bit optimistic, but I think that makes a little more sense. So in other words, that really what Christianity is about, what our Christian faith is about, what Orthodox Christianity is about, is really fulfilling the greatest commandment, to love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. But the next question they might have is, well, okay, fine, well, why can't I do that by myself? So really the question they're asking is, well, why religion? And that's a question that we need to answer, but I think we can answer it. But I think we need to shift our attention on what the church is. I like to say that the church is like a training ground. It's kind of like people like to use the metaphor of hospital, and I don't really like to use that. And see, the hospital metaphor, and the fathers of the church do use it. The hospital metaphor always kind of like is basically like you're sick. It's just a little bit too negative for me. It's like we're always sick. I think the training metaphor for me likes to just emphasize more of what we can become. Right? What we can be. What we have it within us to be. What God has made possible for us. You know, what's possible for human beings. The metaphor I like to use is the arts. And I came up with this because at Fordham we have a program with Alvin Ailey School, and I teach a lot of dancers, and they come to my classes and stuff, and I kind of thought of it there in the sense that it kind of just occurred to me that, what does it really mean to be a dancer? So if I was a scholar of dance and read a lot of dance and read books about dance and asked a lot of questions and didn't really dance, didn't at all dance, would I really know dance? And the school students had a great discussion, like, yeah, you kind of do, but you really wouldn't know it this way, and things like that. Well, what does it mean to know, to be a dancer? To know to be a dancer, you, like say, I use this kind of humorous example of, like all of a sudden I decide I want to be a dancer, so I go to Alvin Ailey School and I want to learn how to dance. And they wouldn't put me in the advanced class, they would put me in the beginner's class. They let me in, but they would put me in this beginner's class. Yeah, and I would be in this beginner. So notice what I'm doing, I'm kind of going to this institution that has a long history and tradition and clearly has some kind of evidence that they could produce as good dancers, people who are dancers. It's like, head over. And it's very religious-like in a way, because if you go by Alvin Ailey, it's like 54th and 9th. They have glass huge glass window so you can actually see the dancers practice. And there's a certain stained glass window effect, if you will. Good. I go in, I start my classes. I realize I like being there. There's a teacher. There are sometimes good teachers, bad teachers. I start to notice that I don't really like everybody I'm with, but I am practicing the community. Some people are in it for the wrong reasons. They want to be famous. I also realize that the institution that produces great art needs money. You know, they're asking me to pay tuition. And there's politics involved because there's a board and they make all the decisions. And there's gossip. But there's great art here. And so I just trust that if I follow the training, I'll be in touch with that great art, even though I'm in the midst of all this institutional stuff that seems so contradictory to the great art. And I advance. Go to the intermediate level. Notice I'm getting better at this. I'm kind of dancing without thinking as I kind of move through the steps. Still some good teachers, some bad mentors, still students who are in it for the wrong reason. I'm having a hard time getting along with them. Others who are really in it for the right reason. I keep progressing, so I have to pay my dues. Still politics and gossip involved. But I progress, and I notice that somehow this thing is working. The training is working. I'm transforming myself into becoming a dancer. Advanced level, I get on stage, I'm a little bit self-conscious. I sort of think about what people think of me rather than just the dance itself. Then eventually I get to that point where when I dance, it's all about the dance. And who knows, maybe I'll be one of the great saints of dance, like Alanelu was, where I'll just have some insight into the tradition and move it in a positive direction. Not everybody can be that. You see what I'm getting at? That to me was what the church is. That's what you can get from the church. That's what you can get from being religious. Yes, you know, painfully, the church in its history, in its various communities, there's all kinds of stuff we just would rather not deal with. But it doesn't really take away from the fact that this long tradition and history, there is a kind of training and practices through the sacramental life, through fasting, through confession, through prayer, that these things work. They transform us. There's great beauty involved. We can become more loving people. And that's the goal. That's the point of the 4 Gospels before Lent. That it's not just about the rules. It's really about Lent, preparation, fasting, prayer, those kinds of things, because you can change. But the way God wants you to change is becoming more loving. To be more loving in the world. Like being a dancer. To do it unthinkingly. Not to do it for praise. To have it just come out of you. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's a struggle. But you must trust the structure. There can be no love without structure. I think that's the one mistake the millennials, I will challenge them on. They think love is a kind of soulmate thing, it just happens, all that kind of stuff. There is no love without structure. That's why family environments are so important in terms of cultivating one's capacity for love, and even to accept love. Because a lot of people don't even have the capacity to accept love because they don't think they're worthy. And the church, its history, its institution, its tradition, is a structure ultimately structuring us, guiding us through its rules toward becoming more loving people. It's very, very difficult to love sometimes. There's all kinds of things that get in the way. We think that we love our parents and our spouses and our children naturally, but we know for a fact that that's not the case. Even the people closest to us, it's hard to love. Friends. And then Jesus comes along and raises the bar. Stranger and enemy. Can you imagine? That's the great difference in Christianity, if you ask me. Not our moral positions, not this, not that. It's really the fact that Christ is calling us to love the stranger and the enemy. When you go tell people that, they're going to be like, you're nuts. I don't have to love my stranger and enemy. Maybe not, kill them indiscriminately or be nice or fine, I'll follow the law, but I'm going to love them. Jesus ups the ante, raises the bar. Enemy and stranger. That's very hard. But I think that, I don't know, maybe I'm a little bit optimistic, but I think that if we say this is what Christianity is really about, I think that if we structure our parishes, our communities more to be houses of spiritual practices, where we're really trying to engage the kinds of practices, figure out what are the kinds of practices that will help us be these kinds of people in the world. If we de-emphasize just knowing certain facts about history or things like that, I don't know. I think that, and look, even if we're just honest about our mistakes and our problems and our challenges, I don't think people leave just because of that. I think people get it, that this is the kind of stuff that happened. And that's what the statistics are showing. We just have to reframe. It's not really a reframing, really. It's really what it should be about. It is. That's what Christianity is about. That is what our tradition's about. But somehow it gets covered over by this more contractual, legalistic way of thinking about it. Because it's easier. And not only that, but if people are prone to leave, scare the hell out of them. That'll keep them. That's not working anymore. Now we're on the road to something much harder. Teaching them that the Christianity, the church, Jesus, the spiritual practices, the sacramental life, everything is meant to work together towards making us more loving people. And it does work. That's what we see in some of the great, spiritual people of our church. Some of the great saints of our church. Some everyday Christians that we just see. It does work. We can produce loving people, even in the midst of all its anti-church stuff that we see. And part of the challenge to learn how to love really is to negotiate that anti-church stuff. It's not really learning how to love when we say, the heck with that, I'm out of here, I'm going somewhere else. For me, that God, if there is God, and I believe very strongly that there's God, I can't believe that God would say, yeah, get the heck out of there. Just tell them where to go. I don't believe that. That's the whole point of stranger and enemy, that we are called somehow to figure out how to reconcile and be with each other. Not to the point of abuse. I want to make sure I add that. God is not saying stay in it even to the point of subjecting yourself to abuse. I don't agree with that. God is not saying that. But we are called to stay in it, try to reconcile as much as we can. So the next question I always anticipate from young people is kind of like, well, yeah, okay, I get that, but how exactly does fasting and prayer make me more loving? I could go on and on, but we have answers to that. There are answers to that. Let me just give you one small thing about fasting. Fasting, when you fast, and really this is a key question amongst young people. They're like, why should we do that? Why does God care about meat? Well, again, if you put it in contractual terms, fasting makes no sense. They're right. In other words, why would God care about meat? But see, fasting, it's interesting, because fasting is, if you link it to relationship with God, if you link it to the fact that the greatest temptation really is not rejection of God, it's forgetfulness of God. That's the greatest temptation. And the church provides a way for us to keep God in our memory by linking it to something we have to do every day. And then it links it with certain moments of the life of Christ, like his death, of course. So we're kind of living the life of Christ, being linked to it. And it works, you know. I mean, I work in New York, so when I'm there in New York, you know, there's a Whole Foods near me, and on Wednesdays when I go, they have a juice bar. So I go to the juice bar there, but luckily they have a breakfast bar. It's one of the big Whole Foods. They have a breakfast bar, and you know, it's a little embarrassing. I get like a piece of bacon. But on Wednesdays I don't. I do not. And for one split second there, I start to think about God when I wouldn't have otherwise. Now, does that make me more loving? It's not a formula, but it does keep me in the game.
Yeah.
It does keep me in it. And that's what the church really wants. The church wants you to stay in it. But they know that you're not going to stay in it unless there's structure. So I think if we frame everything that way, I think that makes a little more sense. Maybe I'm a little bit more optimistic that somehow, and it's actually more true to what it is to be Orthodox. I can tell you one thing for sure. What it means to be Orthodox is that we are created for union with God. That union with God means uniting with the God who is love, which means that we become more loving. And that is possible for us. And that's not a contract. But that does need structure. And that's why it needs religion. And that's why that's how I would answer the question, why religion? Because I just don't think spirituality, I'm not going to say you can't become more loving if you're not religious. I'm not going to say that. All I'm going to say is, I have confidence that this can do it. I'm not going to condemn the other one to kind of affirm the confidence of my own. I don't think I need to do that. I just need to say that I have confidence in this, from personal experience and from what I've seen in others. And that's what I think we have to do, is kind of express that confidence more plainly.